Hello, it's Tony at ExecuNet. Thanks for tuning in. Well, working seems a lot different than it did a few weeks ago, right? I'm sure everyone's nodding as I say this. We're working from home. We're struggling with matters of leadership, how to run organizations. Those of us who are in search or thinking about or planning a transition are thinking about how to do that best when we're not where we usually are and we perceive our resources to not be where they are. To help us answer these questions, I've asked my friend here, Jeff Hyman, to join me to just talk for the next 20 minutes or so and gain perspective on, from his standpoint as an executive recruiter and author of, tell us the name of the book. I'm going to let you do that. It's Recruiting Rock Stars. I beat you to it.
There you go. Thank you. Yes, it's good to see you, Tony. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on.
Terrific. So, Jeff, let's just start with what you perceive to be the state of executive hiring right now. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a tale of two worlds right now. As you would expect with the uncertainty, there are a set of companies, particularly in the hardest hit industries, that everything is at a standstill. They don't know if they will be hiring this week or laying off this week. They don't yet know when customers will return. So there's a complete standstill. On the other hand, there are companies and sectors that are doing brilliantly right now, some by luck, like healthcare, and others because they're capitalizing on change in an ethical way. So they are hiring and they are upgrading their talent, because if you think about it, for the first time now in God knows how long, 10 years, 8 years, there's some great talent available or coming available soon. So smart leaders are using it as an opportunity, an excuse to top grade some of the talent in their organization. So it's a tale of two cities, but there is always opportunity.
You touched on healthcare, and many of us would say, yep, that's totally a growth segment right now. Are there others, Jeff, other industries where you see that growth continuing over the next few months based on where we are as a globe?
Yeah. So I've studied this for a while, and there are certain sectors that do well in times of change, financial stress, et cetera. And then, of course, there are industries that are going to do well for quite some time as a result of just the healthcare crisis that we have now. I made a list of them, and there's a whole bunch. I mean, there's no shortage. But the overall theme is back to basics. So what you see in times like this and in a recession, which I think we all acknowledge we are now in or will be soon, you kind of go back down to the base of Maslow's pyramid. And what Maslow said was people focus much more on the basics, basic needs during times like this, right? So food, clothing, and shelter, and clean air and clean water, and physical safety and security and health and property. Those things take priority right now. So things that wouldn't take priority would be, out of home entertainment, like going to casinos and things like that. So obviously healthcare, sectors, no question, and other completely different industries that support or serve the healthcare industry. You don't have to work in healthcare to be tied to healthcare in some way. Legal and accounting typically do well in situations like this. You're going to have a ton of legal issues and accounting and financial issues. Obviously, telemedicine and telehealth, which I've been an advocate of for years, is now seeing its day. So you're going to see huge growth in that sector. Similarly, on online education, online training, online anything, but especially in training and developing your teams, your students, my kids, learning new skills. Some of the fundamentals tend to grow during these times, things like home repair. So people are probably not going to buy as many new homes, but that means they're going to fix the home they have. They're going to buy fewer cars. That means they're going to fix the cars they have. So all of those sectors and service sectors behind those do well. And then, of course, home entertainment, right? Which is everything from home streaming to home gaming to online games and books and, all those things. So, I have a list a mile long, but the point is you definitely want to think about those sectors that are going to do well and focus your job searching career efforts on those areas.
Yes. Talk to me a bit, Jeff, about the state of executive hiring. Uh, Hiring is happening. Some companies certainly are slowing or freezing, and there are layoffs, as we know, in certain industries. But as you think about the coming 3 to 6 months, and I know it's quite a window, but what's your sense? Will that continue? Meaning, will hiring continue as on a whole, or do you see something dramatically different happening?
Hiring will continue. It will always continue. But as I mentioned, it'll shift, and we have to shift with it as individuals. So, for example, probably not the right time to focus your job search efforts on making a cross country shift,
Hmm.
right? You may want to move from New York to LA, uh, but just the logistical difficulties of that right now would tell me don't spend your time on that piece of your job search. Find something in New York. It's not going to be forever. It's not going to be your last job. Wait for the dust to settle and then think about making that geographic change. Similar, an industry change, right? If you can shift to one of the industries we talked about, great. Um, but it's not the time where employers are going to probably be willing to take a lot of risks.
Mhm.
So you want to hold something constant. If you're going to stay in the same industry, maybe shift functions. Or if you want to stay in the same function, maybe shift industries. But trying to change everything, move across country, change industries, and change functions, and P.S. get a raise while you're at it, proves to be difficult during times like this.
Sure. How has recruiting changed for you, if at all, so far during this time?
I am fortunate in that I've been using video interviewing for many, many years. It's not as good as in person, but I've long felt it's close.
Mhm.
And uh, it gives me the ability to meet with candidates evenings, weekends, whenever, because I'm usually working with people who are currently in a job and they just can only meet evenings and weekends. And so video has been great. So I think most uh, interviews are going to go to this kind of format over the next months and quarters. And so learning how to do that is a different skill. For an individual, you want to do some dry runs with someone you trust to understand how you're perceived in a video interview and also find ways to uh, jump through the camera, right? You want to demonstrate passion and energy. And a lot of that comes through in person. So how do you replicate that on video? Not to mention getting a decent mic and a decent setup and making sure the kids and the dog are locked in the other room for that 45 minutes. So there's just a lot of logistics to think about, but I do think that's going to be a big change for a lot of people.
Right. Let's shift a bit to another skill set which many of us have been forced to learn and are learning still, which is remote work. If you're a leader of an organization, I can imagine, presents its own set of perils. And if you're someone who needs to be part of a productive team of workers, that's another skill set. Let's unpack what I've just said and tell us what you think about how we could do that and stay productive.
Well, until recently, I led a 100% virtual company. It was an online wellness company with about 70 people. So um, I kind of learned how to do that because I was forced to. And what I learned was that it's an interesting dichotomy. You have to over communicate on every front, over communicate to your team, ensure that they are communicating up, right? Because it is a bit of out of sight, out of mind. So over communicate in every medium you can think of: email, video, voicemail, text and messaging and all kinds of things. But at the same time, you have to be very careful not to shout too many different messages because people can only absorb so much, right? So you really have to think about what your key messages are and drill on them over and over and over. On the other hand, you can't even try to micromanage when people work remotely. It is a recipe for disaster. So you focus your time on setting the goals and hopefully quantifying them and the parameters, and then let your team be resourceful to figure out how to get it done. I find in general, people are far more resourceful than you think, than you give them credit for. And if they're not, then you hired the wrong person and you need to deal with that, right? Either part ways or put them under someone else temporarily who can focus on micromanaging them, but you can't spend your days and nights micromanaging. So I find work from home to be very liberating, but it does present challenges. And your goal as leader is to figure out, how do I facilitate communications? How do I over communicate? How do I make sure the team is communicating amongst themselves?
Right.
Video is a great way to do that.
Mhm. Now, one of the perils of working from home, which I've experienced, and ExecuNet is in many ways a virtual company, is social isolation,
Yeah.
just different from social distancing. So if you're working from home and feeling really alone, what do you recommend we do differently to help us not feel that way?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I do sadly anticipate we're going to see a whole human dimension on the backside of this, which is more situations of anxiety, stress, depression, isolation, especially for extroverts who derive their energy from being around others. And that's not a judgment; it's just a fact that, when you take an extrovert, you isolate them. So obviously, staying very connected to your team. And again, I hate to say it again, but video is the best way to do that. And a lot of companies have torn down, the security barriers, and they're saying, fine, talk on YouTube, talk on FaceTime, talk on whatever you got to talk on, just stay visible, stay present. Obviously getting out, I take 2 walks a day, and I think it's fortunately not yet, not a nuclear winter where we can't go outside. So that's a huge one. Yoga, meditation, and I know this sounds so basic, but sleep is so important
Yes.
for proper brain functioning, for proper work focus, and to stay healthy, which right now is super important. And one thing I learned in leading this virtual wellness company was that, initially I was most worried about, are people going to be working enough?
Mm.
And what I found was I was, in the end, actually worried about them working too much and getting burnt out, because there's no separation of work and home. And there are certainly some personalities that are just wired to always be on, always be connected. So we have the CNN in the background where we're watching one bad headline after another. And on top of that, working 24 hours a day, guess what happens? Your sleep is the first thing to go, which leads you down a whole path that you don't want to go down. So getting your sleep is one of the best things you can do right now, which I know is hard to do, but yoga and meditation can help.
It's all great advice. Let's shift gears and talk a bit about leadership. There's so much purported leadership in the news these days. And certainly we've all been on the receiving end of very thoughtful and mostly warm messages from CEOs, letting their consumers know that they're taking care of them, their employees. What do you see as missing, if anything, from the brand of communication and leadership that seems to be out there now? And what do you recommend we do differently?
Well, in the context of your organization, regardless of what your role may be, you have to realize that the style of leadership you were using until 3 weeks ago may not work right now. The best leaders are able to adapt their style to the situation. I call that situational leadership. And over the past week, I've been refreshing myself on what wartime leaders do and how they are effective during those situations. And we're in a war right now in many ways. So your natural proclivity, your natural tendencies may actually backfire right now. So to be a wartime leader, for example, is not about building consensus. It's about picking a direction, saying we're going to take this hill, and it's a bit more of a command and control approach. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be rude or disrespectful or plow over others, but it is a different style than a let's take our time, let's have a meeting, let's build consensus, which in peacetime is hugely valuable. I talk about that all the time in my stuff, but right now we're not in peacetime. So that's an example. Another example, you have one priority right now, and that priority is to fend off your imminent existential threats, right? If your business is 3 months or 6 months or 12 months from running out of cash, you got one focus, and to make sure that cash lasts. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. The goal is to live to fight another day. right? And so that's a different leadership challenge than thinking about 5-year plans and dreaming about where are we heading and new products and all this stuff. All that'll be there in 3 months once we get past this time period. And then the last thing I would say, which is very tough for me to say, is, your culture, your corporate culture, which you've hopefully been very careful to craft and you've thought a lot about it and the DNA of your people, that may need to go on the back burner right now. You may need to break some glass. You may need to piss some people off. You may need to be decisive and not build consensus. And that will feel uncomfortable for a lot of leaders, but that's what the situation demands right now. There will be a time to get back to that. And your people will forgive you for taking charge, taking command of the situation, focusing on the data, not trying to be perfect, just 80-20. We're going to pick a direction and go and run like hell. The culture will still be intact when we get past this period. But tiptoeing and being delicate and trying to get everyone under the tent, you'll waste days and weeks and months that we don't have.
Mm.
So that's probably the biggest change that I think people need to get used to for the foreseeable future.
Right. Well, Jeff, as always, I appreciate your perspective on all these matters. Thank you for making time to talk to me and share your views with our audience. And I'm sure we'll be talking again real soon. Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Tony. Thank you.